Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Now, the White House unveiled a 20-point proposal it says could bring an immediate halt to Israel's genocide in Gaza, which has killed more than 66,000 Palestinians and left the Palestinian enclave in ruins. According to the press conference, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has accepted the plan. But according to Al Jazeera, Hamas's negotiating team is currently assessing it. Now, on Friday, we saw an empty hall within the UN General Assembly. Now, this occurred when Benjamin Netanyahu was delivering his speech at the General Assembly, but people had left the building. What does that speak of with regards to Israel's isolation within the international community? Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Professor Jeff Halper, who is part of the Israeli Committee on Against House Demolitions. Prof. Halper, good to have you back again. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. Prof. Halper, I know we had brought you in to discuss, obviously, the emptiness which we saw in the UN General Assembly, but I want to touch on yesterday's announcement of this 20-point plan. In theory, of course, there's a lot of criticism to it, and rightfully so, given that someone called Tony Blair is about to emerge and be some sort of quote-unquote viceroy of Gaza. But I just wanted to get your take on it, because it really has a lot of skeptics when it comes to this proposal.
Well, it should have skeptics. It's not really it's a proposal. It's not really a plan. I mean, besides, the only concrete part of it is Hamas releases the hostages and returns the bodies within 48 to 72 hours. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of proposals. Israel might withdraw, or it's going to redeploy. There's no timeline. There's no guarantees that if Hamas does give up the hostages, that in fact Israel will stop the fighting. In other words, it's really a kind of a ultimatum to Hamas: surrender, and then we'll see. And certainly, given the United States' support for Israel, Israel can find any pretext to start the fighting again. So I think this is very dangerous. The hope is maybe that if it works out in a way that the actual fighting will stop in Gaza City, and that will help the Palestinians. But that's doubtful. There's no guarantees for it. And politically, of course, it's a disaster for the Palestinians, because it isn't dealing with Gaza as a political issue. It's simply, as you're saying, giving Gaza over to some neo-colonial board of peace, as Trump calls it, where he's the chairman, and Tony Blair is the CEO. So politically, it just leaves the Palestinians in a limbo. So that it's not a good deal, I think, for the Palestinians.
Yeah, and the thing is, why it's not seen as a good deal, it's because Israel has reneged on a previous ceasefire deal. Let's go to March this year. And it was quite clear that, in their words, it was Hamas who had obviously broken the ceasefire. On that basis itself, it's very hard to trust Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet, isn't it, Prof. Halper? Because this has played out before. And even though he sat in the White House with the US President Donald Trump, and there was this whole big grand press conference that we saw yesterday, there's still a lack of trust element that not just Palestinians are looking at, but the rest of the world when it comes to Netanyahu.
No, that's right. I mean, certainly Israel doesn't feel bound by any real agreements, as we saw with the hostage thing a year ago. And that's, I think, the danger of this agreement. At the same time, let me just say that I think Israel wants to end the fighting in Gaza. The army certainly wants to. The Israeli public wants as well. So the question is really, if the hostages are released, is there some kind of a guarantee that Israel would in fact end the fighting? Because that would be a kind of an immediate deal without huge implications, it might be useful. But again, the big danger is that Hamas will give up the hostages. And this is what Israel, even the hostage families say this. First, let's get back the hostages, then we can continue the war. Now, I don't think Israel wants to continue the war anyway. So regardless of what happens, well, that's not really true. They won't stop the fighting unless the hostages are returned. But there is a chance they might if they are. It's a catch-22, because if Hamas gives up its main bargaining chip, which is the hostages, there's no guarantee that Israel will in fact end the fighting. So this is just an Israeli dictated ultimatum. I mean, Trump said a while ago, unconditional surrender. And this is unconditional surrender for Hamas. That wasn't, of course, it's not a deal at all. Hamas was never a part of the negotiating process. And so they're really in a difficult situation. They're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
And Prof. Halper, there's two ministers within the cabinet that I think are driving this narrative for this genocide to continue, number one, and especially the expansion of territories within the occupied West Bank, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Now, obviously, Benjamin Netanyahu cannot be absolved of any supposed non-blame on this, because just like those two, he is as complicit as the right wing of the Israeli government. So, I mean, how much of an influence are they going to have really in trying to say, no, we don't want this proposal or plan which was presented by Donald Trump to go through, because at the end of the day, we really want to see the completion of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people in Gaza?
Well, that's their position, but I think there's a lot of support. Obviously, this is a super pro-Israel proposal, that Trump presented. So I think the Israeli people and the Israeli army want it. They're even enthusiastic about it. And so I think Smotrich and Ben-Gvir themselves are isolated. I don't think they're going to resign from the government or do anything. So I think this deal would go through from their point of view. What they're really interested in more is annexation. In other words, we're fixated on Gaza, and for good reasons. But in fact, the political dynamic is really much more on the West Bank, where the settlements are expanding, Palestinians are being driven off their land. There's Israeli military operations in the refugee camps in the north. 40,000 people have been displaced, in anticipation of the Abraham Accords coming back and normalization. So they're much more, as settlers, concerned with what's happening in the West Bank, which is going their way. And I don't think they'll make a big deal anymore about Gaza. I think Israel has lost its interest in Gaza because it has destroyed Hamas militarily. It's pacified the Palestinians. And I think Israel's willing to give up Gaza, leave. It doesn't want it, in order to focus more on the West Bank.
Yeah, and before we go to the breakup, Prof. Halper, this obviously discussion on the West Bank, because what we've heard U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday evening saying no more annexation will happen. Again, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, I mean, you speak to it. They want to continue this along with the Israeli settlers. This is not going to sit well with them, is it, Prof. Halper? Because they want this to occur. But if you've got U.S. President Donald Trump, the biggest supplier of everything from medical to weapons, telling you, no, you will not go and annex more land in the West Bank. It's going to be difficult for the Israeli government, isn't it?
It doesn't have to annex. Look, the Israeli government today has full control of the West Bank. It can build settlements wherever it wants to. There's de facto annexation. Israel already has the West Bank. There already is a greater Israel. The green line doesn't even appear on maps anymore. Recognition of a Palestinian state is very abstract. There's no borders, no boundaries whatsoever. So what Israel needs is recognition that and acceptance that its settlements will remain. And that's what the Abraham Accords do. Don't forget, together with the Abraham Accords, you have Trump's vision of peace.
Yeah.
There's a Trump plan for Palestine that he presented in that was Israel keeps all its settlements, which means that Israel expands to about 85% of Palestine. And the Palestinians are locked into little islands. Well, if that's recognized by the Arab governments, right, in the Abraham Accords, especially Saudi Arabia, then Israel doesn't have to annex. It's simply accepted. It's simply recognized. So I don't think this annexation is such a big deal. It doesn't limit Israel, and on the contrary, in the end, it will be accepted.
After the break,
as a political fact, if not actual annexation.
Okay. Please hold on, Professor Halper, because after the break, we will continue the conversation with regards to Friday's UN General Assembly. As I mentioned, it was a nearly empty hall within that. How does that make Israel even more isolated? Do stay tuned. The conversation continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Professor Jeff Halper, who's part of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Prof, let's turn the attention to Friday. I'm sure, like you, many were watching the scenes that unfolded at the UN General Assembly. I just want to get your take on it because it was quite clear nobody was interested in listening to Benjamin Netanyahu and what he had to say.
Thank you, Paul.
No, that's true. I mean, everybody knows the real story, that Zionism is settler colonialism, that Israel wants to Judaize Palestine, that there's an occupation, that there's genocide, that Israel's driving the Palestinians off their land. There will be apartheid in the end. Everybody knows that. And that's accepted by the international community for all kinds of power transactional politics. So that it kind of plays this symbolic thing of upholding international law or being against genocide or recognizing a Palestinian state, because that's what it should do. That it knows that's what governments should do. But at the same time, that doesn't bother Israel. The isolation doesn't bother because it's not real isolation. Israel, there are no sanctions. As long as there's no sanctions, Israel doesn't care. It sees this as blowing over. Part of the deal that wasn't talked about yesterday was the United States would give Israel backing in terms of annulling the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court cases against Netanyahu and about genocide, so that the United States will give Israel protection. And the European countries are not really going to sanction Israel. The General Assembly can't really sanction Israel. So Israel sees this, okay, another there's ups and downs, so they don't like us, they criticize us, whatever, but it doesn't matter politically because it doesn't affect our relations with the U.S. It doesn't affect our ability to continue building settlements and expanding, and it doesn't affect the outcomes of the Abraham Accords, which will be a greater Israel and a Palestinian Bantustan. So as long as that's the political reality, Israel doesn't really care how much symbolically it's isolated at the UN.
And here's the thing, Prof. Halper. I listened to the speech, right? And I could not help but wonder when the time for sanctions could occur, because if what we're looking at from a UN General Assembly perspective, these are delegates of countries. They are members of, obviously, nations, which means they have an active role within governments. And when you looked at the whole, it just wasn't Arab and Muslim nations. It was also some Western nations also that had actually walked out from it. And of course, probably 90 to 95% of global South nations. So if we were to look at that, one would say, okay, can the next step potentially be sanctions on Israel? Of course, from a sporting perspective, FIFA and UEFA are still in discussion with regards to that. But in your view, Prof. Halper, how close or how far are we to actual tangible sanctions against Israel? Microsoft, of course, have suspended parts of its AI program to Israel. Again, parts of it. So how close or how far are we to actual tangible sanctions like what we saw in South Africa during apartheid?
No, I don't think we're close at all. I think the United States would prevent it, certainly through the UN. And I don't really believe the European countries would sanction Israel in any kind of a way. But don't forget, the sanctions have to do with Gaza. They don't have to do with the bigger story, which is the Israeli takeover of Palestine and so on. So as soon as there's an end to the fighting, which could be soon, especially if somehow this proposal is accepted or they deal with it somehow, then the whole threat of sanctions disappears. Now, the sanctions are Gaza connected. They're not Palestine connected. So Israel can continue to do its war crimes in the West Bank, ethnic cleansing and everything else. That's not connected. That won't trigger sanctions. The only thing that will trigger sanctions is if it continues in Gaza. And I don't believe it's going to continue in Gaza for long, because even the Israeli public and the army doesn't want that. So I don't think sanctions are really a worry for Israel. And that's why this walkout really didn't mean much for Netanyahu.
Yeah. Prof. Halper, and that's why I want to come to the United States of America, because it's quite clear U.S. President Donald Trump is giving his unconditional support, just like probably every other American president before him. And as long as he has that unconditional support from Trump, as long as he has the unconditional support from many within Congress who, of course, are very deeply connected, if we were to read the reports and listen to analysts, are very close to AIPAC, really, nothing's going to happen to Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, his government, are going to sit back, arms folded, saying the world can't do us anything because we have Washington, D.C. giving us its full support.
But not only Washington, D.C. The big story for Israel, the big picture is the Abraham Accords, because this will normalize and recognize the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. You'll get to a two-state solution, which is really apartheid, where Israel is on, like I said, 85% of Palestine, and the Palestinians are locked into little islands on the 15%. This is really the big story. And from that point of view, you know, Israel's on track. It's not only Washington that's supporting this. This couldn't happen if the Arab governments weren't supporting it. I mean, look what's behind this terrible proposal of yesterday, this ultimate surrender. I mean, Egypt, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and then you go to Indonesia and Pakistan and Turkey, you know, other Muslim countries. They all support this. So this could, if the Arab world and the Muslim world would really stand behind the Palestinians and say, no, there has to be Palestinian rights, not some vague, what Saudi Arabia says, pathway to a Palestinian state sometime in the future. That nonsense. If there was a real Arab-Muslim solidarity with Palestinians, as the Arab and Muslim peoples want, as opposed to their governments, the Abraham Accords couldn't go through. Then Washington would have real pushback. But they don't. They're collaborating. And so I would say it's a Washington Arab Sunni Muslim state kind of a coalition that's pushing this through. And not only Trump. MBS is just as culpable as Trump is. Who knows? Maybe Syria will come into it as well. That's the problem.
Yeah, and of course, Syria and Israel, looks like they may even go ahead and actually supposedly normalize themselves. Prof. Halper, we've got 1.5 minutes. Tony Blair, I mean, everyone knows that his government, when he was a prime minister of the United Kingdom, Afghanistan, Iraq, the devastation there, in 1.5 minutes, how bad or how good of an idea is him returning in whatever role he's going to play within Gaza?
Well, it's a neo-colonial role. And we have to read the code of yesterday's proposal by Trump, because it says there'll be a temporary interim government over Gaza. Trump called it the Board of Peace, of which he's the chairman, and Blair would be kind of the CEO. So it's a Western European neo-colonial administration of Gaza. but it's in place, if you read the wording of the 21 points, until there's reforms in the Palestinian Authority. And so it looks like the Palestinian Authority would then take over Gaza. But Netanyahu yesterday in the White House said what reforms means. It means the PA has to accept Israel as a Jewish state. It can't fight against the settlements anymore. It has to withdraw its cases from the ICJ and the ICC. It has to de-radicalize, which means it has to give up the Palestinian struggle. So really what's written in this report is the Palestinians will get control of Gaza once more if they give up their struggle for self-determination. That's really what it means. And Blair is kind of the custodian until the time when the collaborationist PA de-radicalizes, although I wouldn't call Abu Mazen radical exactly, accepts Israel and its settlements, stops its struggle, and then they'll be able to come in and administer Gaza. It's not statehood. It's not sovereignty. It's not independence. It's simply kind of a neo-colonial arrangement for a submissive Palestinian people to be allowed to live under Israeli control in their own country.
Prof. Halper, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
That's Professor Jeff Halper, who is part of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition. After the break, I'll be chatting to Advocate Paul Hoffman. Everyone listened to that press conference from the Special Investigating Unit. It was, of course, the revelations with regards to the Tembisa Hospital. And one cannot help but think of the late Babita Deokaran, who was, of course, gunned down because of her being a whistleblower. That conversation is after the break.